Warm welcome, everyone. So good to see you, folks here in person, folks online. This is the Tuesday Tune-In. It's been a while since I've offered the Tuesday Tune-In, so it's it'll be good. We'll give it a whirl. So that we're going to use the usual format, which is about half an hour or so of guided meditation, and then half an hour or so of Dhamma talk, and quite a bit of time actually, for comments, reflections, questions at the end. And before that, I just want to say that so this Sunday, so the Sunday Sounds of Dhamma, the talk is 9:30 to 10:30, and then this Sunday there will be a brunch. So folks are welcome to come for a bit of a potluck after. Oh, you're welcome to come for the talk and then stay after for the brunch, or just come for the brunch. And then Spanish Dharma class starts on November 18th, and precept ceremony, always a very, very joyful occasion. If you can attend either online or in person, I highly recommend it. It's an opportunity when Jesse Peters and Todd Brown will be taking the Bodhisattva vows, and will be taking their ethical commitments to a new level. And they'll receive their Dharma names and good stuff like that. So anyway, it's always a very, I think, very happy moment to see when people do that. But yeah, and then in December we'll start the new art virtual tours. I'm very much looking forward to that. And those will probably be drop-ins. Probably won't need really to do any kind of registration for that. Just drop-in sessions. But for now, we'll go ahead and begin our guided meditation. And today, I would like us to focus on the feeling tones of experience. So what that means is really to observe different experiences, different kinds of what we call contact, and notice whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, some just undiscernible kind of basic tone. And so I'll say a little bit more about how you might approach that as we go along. For now, you can just go ahead and try to find that balanced and upright posture. So oftentimes it's good to begin with just a bit of movement. Thank you. Yeah, so sensing the weight of your body, supported by your seat or whatever equipment you're using for your meditation today. Tuning in to the natural stability of the body, resting right here in this place. Relaxing the belly. No need to hold on. And from that steady base, allowing the bones of the spine to come into alignment. Bones carrying the weight of the body so that the muscles can soften and widen. Allowing that alignment to move all the way up through the neck and the head. And softening the eyes. And now turning the attention to the sensations of touch in the hand, one hand, very simple sensations. Being curious about sensations of touch in the hand, and perhaps beginning to notice whether the sensations are neutral or pleasant or unpleasant. Just staying with it moment by moment. Coming back again and again to sensations of touch, and just checking in. And now shift, turning the attention to sensations of smell. Could be very subtle. Just observing any sensations of smell and noticing whether they're pleasant or unpleasant or just neutral. Being curious about sensations of smell. Noticing the feeling tones associated with the sensations that are arriving. And now another shift. Another shift to turn the awareness to the sensations of hearing. No need to strain at all. Just noticing the sensations of hearing as they arrive in awareness. Attending to sensations of hearing moment by moment. Are they pleasant or neutral or unpleasant? letting the mind rest on the sensations of hearing. And now one more shift to turn the attention to thinking as sensations in the mind. The mind as a sense organ, and thoughts as mere sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations in the mind. Being curious about thoughts as sensations in the mind. And noticing unpleasant or neutral or pleasant. Beautiful. So that brings us to the end of the meditation portion of the program today. And if you have any reflections on that or comments, questions, you can attend to those at the end, mostly because today I want to try to tie this all together and talk about these feeling tones in the Dharma talk today too. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutang dhammang sanghang namasami. When we observe our experience, there are a lot of different attributes that we can tune into. Just as we saw in the meditation, we can turn to different sense experience happening through the body. We can turn to different mental experience as it's known by the consciousness. And the reason for this is not simply to be present with what is here. Although being present has its advantages, it certainly opens up our ability to respond to what we're observing. But there's more that can unfold. And the way that we see this spoken about in the early Buddhist teachings is in these various frameworks that talk about the interrelationship between the body and the mind and the way that it interacts with the world. And so the framework that I want to talk about today is one called the khandhas or the skandhas. Khandhas in Pali. So there are two main ancient Indic languages in which Buddhism has been written down and studied for thousands of years. Pali is one of them, and Sanskrit is the other. So in Pali, it's khandhas. In Sanskrit, it's skandhas. And usually the way that we translate that is aggregates, or it means literal heaps of stuff, piles. And it means taking particular experiences and grouping them into piles, if you will, into heaps, so that we can begin to relate to them or study them with more clarity. So the aggregates are 5. And it's the rupa, the body. So I'll give you the Pali words, although there's no quiz at the end, so don't worry about that part if it feels foreign to you. So there's rupa, which means the body or the form. Actually, the little translation for that is form, and it means the physical material form here. And then there's Vedana, and Vedana is what I was calling feeling tones. Feeling tones. And it's not the same as emotions. We need to be clear about that. So it's not even a like or a dislike, but it is this kind of this pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. You might think of it as like the valence or like the charge that something has, right? It is more subtle than the liking or the disliking. And it's usually pre-verbal. It's understood to be something that's happening even before we have a language for addressing whatever it is that we're observing. So we have the feeling tones, the body and the feeling tones. And then the next one is sanya. Sanya is a word that means perception. So it's the way that we identify things, the way we put a label on a thing. So you hear a sound and you think plane, airplane, or you see something or smell something and you think rose, and it's very closely related to language. So whatever is your native language, sometimes things will spit out in that language, even if that's not the one you're using day to day today. And but the perception is related to language and therefore also related somewhat to memory, right? The way that we categorize the world has to do also with our experiences of the world. So if we encounter something new, we think, well, it's like this other thing, even though it might not be exactly that other thing, right? It's a kind of flower, but I don't know. It's not a rose, let's say. And then we have sankharas. Sankharas is a fairly complex phenomena. It's a fairly complex word that has many, many different uses in the early teachings, but the way that you can relate to it in this particular framework is that it is the responses and the reactions that we have to our perceptions. You know? And those are thoughts like, I want it, or I don't want it, or, making a plan. We say, you need sankharas to bake a cake because you need a plan. You have to get your ingredients together and then you know what to do with them, and so on. And then we have the last of the five is vijnana. Vijnana is the consciousness. And this is talking about consciousness without thought. You can think about the consciousness here as like a field of awareness. Another way to think about it is a sort of flow of moments of awareness, a sort of flow of individual touch points. And so the way that it's described is using this word contact. So some of you have seen my one and only and therefore my favorite prop. And actually our new resident at the vihara here, Nino, thought that this prop is very kind of fun. And this is a demonstration of how our sense organs work. So if you have your ear, for example, and the appropriate object for the ear arrives, so some kind of a sound, right? And the consciousness is able to attend to that. So meaning you're not passed out, you're not asleep, or even if you are asleep sometimes, right, you can hear a sound and it'll wake you up. But the consciousness has to be able to attend in a certain way. And when those three things happen, when the consciousness, the sense organ, a functioning sense organ, and its appropriate object come together, then there's said to be a moment of that type of consciousness. So there's a moment of ear consciousness. If the ball represents your ear, the sound came, it hit your ear, and so there is this kind of stimulation of the consciousness in a particular way, in the way of sound. And each one is slightly different, right? So like the taste of the flower is quite different than the smell of the flower or the sight of the flower, right? And we know that, and it affects our consciousness differently, right? So the taste of the flower might be quite unpleasant, even though the sight of the flower or the smell of the flower is quite pleasant, right? So we know that different contacts have these different tones associated with them. So all of that is happening literally moment by moment, all day long, at all the sense gates, right? And we, by our consciousness, by where we place our attention, not the consciousness, the independent consciousness itself, but by where we place our attention, become aware of certain stimulation, right? And we did that exactly in the meditation, right? First, we pay attention to this thing. Then we notice, oh, the mind, the attention has actually gone off to some other thing for a while. Then we come back to the sense that we're trying to observe, right? And you can see that flow, that fluctuation of how attention leads us to become aware of contacts happening in a particular order. And so the question about this, so one thing that I want to point out is that there are many, many teachings about the aggregates. The aggregates, the study of the aggregates is so important that in one of the discourses, the Buddha himself, the historical person who discovered the path of enlightenment, said that without understanding the aggregates, we cannot wake up. And by understanding the aggregates, we can wake up. It's a very declarative statement. It's a very interesting declarative statement, in fact, because he doesn't say that about everything, right? But by understanding this particular form of observation of the body and the mind, these different functions that are going on, we can actually unlock knowledge, a completely life-changing perspective on reality. Yeah. And he says very specifically also that, let's see if I find my bookmark today. So there's a whole chapter. I mean, there are literally hundreds of different discourses in which the Buddha spoke about this framework of the five aggregates. And there is a whole chapter of about 150 of them grouped together in the connected discourses. So it's chapter 22. And just looking at one of those, which one am I on here? Number 82. The Buddha says very clearly that this contact, when the consciousness, the organ, and the appropriate object of the organ come together, then there is the feeling tone. So it always happens that way. The Vedana, each thing has its feeling tone. Sometimes if we can't discern it, then it might be that it's neutral, or it might be just that we're not able to tune into the subtlety of the tone itself, right? We're too overwhelmed, or things are moving quickly, or whatever's happening there. And also that contact is the cause for the perception, so that always when there is a contact, there's also some kind of perception. The perception, we should be clear, is not always accurate, right? So if you are, for example, taking some medicine that makes you woozy, you might misidentify things. Our perceptions can be quite mistaken sometimes, depending on the quality of the mind and the state of the body and so on, right? We can make mistakes about that. But nonetheless, there is some kind of perception happening with each contact. And then he says again that that's also the reason why we have these reactions and responses, because we perceive the world, we have an interaction with the world, we perceive the world, and then we respond. That is the nature of what's happening here. That is, we are literally instruments of response. Instruments of response. And I love this. There are many koans about this actually in the Zen Buddhist tradition. And I'll say something about one of them in a minute. But before that, what I want to say is tuning into the aggregates in this way, tuning into the body and the mind in this way, also has a very important benefit. And that is that it gives us a little bit more choice. It gives us more opportunity to respond with clarity to what is going on, what we're experiencing. And the example that I want to give about that is a story about when I was on retreat a few years ago, not long ago, maybe 3 years ago now. I was on a month-long retreat at Spirit Rock retreat center out in California. They were very kind to host me for my solo that year. And I was practicing by myself in a big, large group of people, but I was in the hall there, and the hall was full, right? Because there were a lot of people here on this month-long retreat. And so all of the cushions were taken for the most part. But I had brought I have an inflatable cushion that I use when I'm sitting for long periods of time. It's easier on my hip. But my inflatable cushion was in my room at that time. So I went into the hall and I sit down. There's no cushion at my place. And so I just grab one of the very last cushions, if not the last cushion in the hall, and take it to my seat. And it's one of these cushions made out of buckwheat. It's made out of these little hard pellets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them. I find them pretty uncomfortable, but that's what there was. So I said, okay, I'm just going to sit down and do morning meditation. I'll have to remember to bring my cushion, my personal cushion next time. So, okay, so I sit down, I have my eyes closed, I'm meditating, I'm paying attention to my breath. I'm just doing a simple, easy mindfulness of breathing. And then at some point I notice, painful feeling. Painful feeling where I'm sitting here. And I notice that. And those are even the words that come to mind, painful feeling. Oh, and I notice, and then I remember, okay, there isn't another cushion in the hall, so I'm just going to stay sitting. I'm not even going to move necessarily. I'm just, okay, check, noticed. Okay, then I go back to meditating, I'm meditating, I'm meditating. And then, boom, again, there is this perception, oh, painful feeling on where my body meets my cushion. Painful feeling. But again, I think, well, I don't have another option, so I'm just going to stay seated for a little bit longer. And I'm sitting, and it's nice and quiet in the hall. And then suddenly I have this thought, I hate this cushion. And now that word hate does not cross my mind very often. That is like a very clear red flag. I thought to myself, whoa, 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 what's happening here? What is this? I hate this cushion. And then I realized, right? What happened? What happened was that I wasn't mindful. I'd lost my mindfulness of those feelings, right? Those feeling tones. And so immediately I jumped from the painful feeling right through the perception, right onto that sankhara, right onto that reaction. And that's what I observed, was the sankhara. I observed the reaction. Even though we know that in order for that to happen, there had to have already been the contact, the painful feeling, the perception, all of that has to happen in order for the sankhara to happen, right? So, but it was a beautiful moment because there was a very deep teaching there, right? The difference in choice that I had between the time when I actually noticed the painful feeling and the time that I wasn't paying enough attention and I didn't notice the painful feeling was quite dramatic, right? On the one hand, I got to choose, okay, am I going to get up? Am I going to sit down? Am I okay with this? Am I willing to, am I willing? Am I not? Versus this kind of being dragged by, the mind being dragged along by the unpleasant feeling tone and going directly to the reaction. And this is happening all the time, right? This is happening time and time and time again in our lives, that we are reacting to our feeling tones without even so much as moments of awareness of what is it that we are reacting to. We're just observing those sankharas, those reactions, yeah? And that's not a problem, right? Whatever part of the aggregates that you are observing is a helpful thing to notice. right? So just as much as noticing the feeling tone and saying, oh, unpleasant feeling was interesting, and it gave me a certain opportunity that I'd prefer to have the choice, and more equanimity around that, my response to that feeling tone. Still, seeing the sankhara, the reaction, was also quite informative, right? Very informative. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you this story. Right? So it's not that we should put ourselves down if what we're seeing is reactions. It's more like, okay, how is that informing me about what I am or am not observing about my experience? And try sometimes. So we can do it both ways. We can roll it forward and we can roll it back. And by roll it back, I mean, so once I had the sankhara experience, once I had that reactive experience, I could look back and say, well, okay, now wait, what was it that was the condition that brought forth that reaction, right? Where did that come from? Oh, well, of course, it came from that painful feeling, right? And in this case, I had a little bit of help by having seen the painful feeling before. That's kind of nice. But still, maybe even without that, I would have been able to roll it back and understand that that's where it was coming from, right? From the pain. The roll it forward part is also kind of interesting in terms of when you see various parts of the aggregates, and then you can, as I said before, you can sort of look at what is the tendency that would come next. And are you going to follow that tendency or not follow that tendency, right? So the roll it forward is also something like, I know that if I speak to, and I'm just giving you a random example here, if I speak to XYZ person in my family and they start talking about politics, then that's, chances are there's going to be an unpleasant feeling tone there, and that sparks all kinds of reactions. So you know about that when you're going into it. You might choose to go into it and you might choose not to, but you can roll forward, right? In the sense of, okay, you have enough perception, so enough self-perception, enough self-awareness, enough experience with your own aggregates to also start to see a little bit of the pattern there and make choices about that as well. Yeah. So that's one benefit to it. And then the last thing that I want to say is, as I promised, a little bit about an even bigger picture. Why is it that the Buddha would go so far as to say that this was capable of unlocking profound wisdom about reality, right? So we know that we ourselves are embedded in certain principles of the way things work. We are not separate from the way that reality works. Of course, we live within reality. We all live within the same reality, actually. And so we are subject to whatever are the principles that drive reality. But what happens oftentimes is that we are caught up in view, right? We have ideas. And so this is why the Buddha said there are 3 root problems for human beings: greed, hatred, and delusion or confusion about the world, right? So we often have some kind of delusion or some kind of mistaken idea about how things actually work. And so there's a wonderful story that ties this into our getting to know ourselves as instruments of response. And what does that mean exactly? Okay, so there's a story in the Zen tradition, and we don't actually see this in earlier texts. So it's unclear to me where it came from or whether this is an actual story of something that occurred or just a legend. But nonetheless, it's a very informative story, so I'm going to tell you. And this is from Keizan Zenji. Keizan Zenji wrote a book called Transmission of the Light. And so Keizan was 4th generation after Eihei Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan. And he wrote this book, which was telling the enlightenment stories of all of the teachers in his lineage going back to the Buddha himself. And so there's a story about Venerable Ananda and Venerable Mahakashapa in this book called Transmission of the Lamp, or Transmission of the Light. And Ananda goes to Mahakashapa and he says, so now the way that it's told is that even though Venerable Ananda was the Buddha's attendant for 25 years or so, he was not a full arahant at the time that the Buddha passed away. That happened later, actually, after the Buddha died, which is quite interesting to think about. Even somebody who, did ultimately become an arahant, it took him quite a long time of knowing the teachings quite intimately and well, right? He was the one who recited the teachings back to people. So don't despair if it takes a while in your case too, huh? Don't despair. But in any case, this story is about Venerable Ananda. Venerable Ananda approaches Venerable Mahakashapa, and Mahakashapa is an arahant during the Buddha's time, and he becomes one of the folks who leads the Sangha after the Buddha's death. And so this is happening after the Buddha's death. And Venerable Ananda says to him, is there something else that was transmitted to you by the Buddha other than the robe and bowl? Was there something else that was transmitted to you? So in other words, Venerable Ananda is saying something like, did you get some kind of like special teaching, some decoder ring, like, was there the secret handshake that I missed? What happened? Like, why is it, right? What is it that you got that I didn't get? Mm-hmm. And Venerable Mahakashapa does this wonderful response. So rather than try to explain to him that that's not what happened, rather than trying to convince Venerable Ananda that that's not what happened, he calls Venerable Ananda's name, Ananda! And Ananda, looks at, yes, responds to him. And he says, take down the banner pole. And the banner pole was a literal, this is something that used to happen in India, in North India at this time, in the roughly 6th century before the Common Era. They would put up these big banners, these big, fabric on a pole, like a flag kind of thing, to indicate that there was a Dharma debate happening, right? And so Venerable Mahakashapa is basically saying to Venerable Ananda, set down all your views. Set down the debate. There's nothing for you to win here. Just take down the banner pole. Take down the whole thing. All the views, all the fight, there's this side, there's that side. Everything he's memorized. Set it all down. Just take it down. Why? Because the one that has the views isn't the one that's going to understand nirvana. To understand nirvana is to relinquish all of that. Right? Nirvana is the absence of all of that. So you can so basically it's like that. It's like when we're studying the aggregates, when we're studying our reactions and our responses to things, and what are our perceptions, and what was the feeling that made that happen, or that was underlying those reactions. What we're seeing is this thing as, you could say, this perfectly functioning flow of phenomena. It doesn't need us to understand it. We can't conceptualize. It's so complex and so fleeting any view whatsoever doesn't capture it. That's why nirvana is called the deathless. That's why nirvana is called the unconditioned, because it is completely beyond that. Not beyond what we're experiencing, right? The Buddha says, study what you're experiencing so that you can see its true nature, and you can see that its true nature is completely unable to be captured by your thoughts and your views and your ideas about it. It is much, much more vast than that. So set down the banner pole, right? And just be this thing. Be this thing so fully that it shows itself to you. It blossoms right in front of your eyes. Don't think that there's some secret decoder ring. Don't think that there's some secret handshake, that there's any concept that you need to learn. The concepts are helpful, but the awakening is in the relinquishment of all that. All right, friends, so that is what I wanted to share with you tonight. And time for time for comments, questions, concerns, views. Anything about the meditation? Yes, Dick, please.
Yeah, it seems that recognition or the experience of relinquishment is something that has to happen many, many times for it really to sink in. Because there's such a tendency for the ego to conceptualize the experience and then get attached to it. And so it seems like, and it's always a different kind of relinquishment.
Right. It's happening by degrees, oftentimes, right? And it is kind of like that. It's kind of like waves kind of meeting the shoreline and then receding, right? We go back and forth and we have an aha moment, and then we somehow kind of fit that back into our diluted structure of life, right?
Yeah.
Or we have, just as you said, different types of insights. So we can have an insight about embodied experience and still be really clueless about certain kinds of mental experience, right? Or vice versa. I always joke with people that for me, understanding the mind is quite simple, but understanding the material world is a little bit more of a mystery to me. So it is like that. I agree with you, Stig.
Yeah. I had one other comment. I don't want to take too much time. If somebody has another burning question, I can easily wait for the next one. But I want to. Anybody else want to chime in?
No, I think please go right ahead, Stig. Thank you for being sensitive to that, though.
Yeah. Okay. So I was at a dentist. I have a memory. This is a week ago or so, and I was having some fillings replaced, and I was being numbed up. In earlier times, I would say, "Don't numb me up," but I've gotten over that. I was hearing the experience is quite okay, not a problem here, and I was wondering, aren't you feeling something, a little bit of unpleasantness, but it wasn't anything nothing overwhelming. But then the sound of the drill was so unpleasant. I recognized this sound is very unpleasant. And the next thing I knew, I was in the chair of as a kid, having this loud machine drilling in and not feeling very good, remembering the physical pain of that experience. So it was like a trauma that was being resurfaced from a memory. And so I'm wondering, how does that fit into the sixth sense door of thinking? Because it's a complex composite of different experiences there. And this also relates to how to explain this sixth sense door to other people when they ask about it, because it's a tricky territory.
Yes, yes. Yep. So that's a very good example of what happens when the mind is relating to the mind, right? So you have this thought about the sensation that you're feeling in the moment, right? You have some kind of a sankhara about it. But then there is this relationship there's this association of another sankhara that goes with that, right? Then this first sankhara becomes the object, the object of contact, and then there's a new perception and a new reaction to that, right? Which goes with the memory. And so that can, just as you said, that can have just as much unpleasant feeling tone as if the physical thing were happening again, right? This is how trauma happens for people oftentimes, right? That they can actually start to feel like phantom pains in their body, or feel, a tremendous surge of panic, right? And all the physical, all the adrenaline and all those things start to happen because of the inter reactions that are happening there between the mind and the body, right? So the key to that, though, in terms of, again, kind of the practice with that, is to understand that when the mind is relating or reacting to the thought, right, then the unpleasant feeling tone that's happening is the thought, right?
Yeah.
It's the unpleasantness of the thought itself.
Yeah.
That's actually sparking even more, right? Perception, reaction, and that's why that cycle goes around and around. Versus one of the ways to really, and this can, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying one of the ways to really attend to those kinds of past painful experiences is to do our best not to bring them back in again, right? To remind ourselves actually that what's happened in the past, the results of what's happened in the past, by and large, so not all of it, because some karma still needs time to unfold. Some karmic vipaka, or karmic resultants, are still in their kind of energetic phase or momentum phase. They haven't quite unfolded. We know that that's true, that some things still haven't kind of resolved. But generally speaking, much of what's happening to us in a day-to-day basis is resolved. The resultants of those things are baked into, you could say, this moment by the fact that the conditions have already come, they've gone, the responses, they've come, they've gone, and so on, right? So there has been this kind of chain reaction that led us to this point. And by the fact that we are here at this point means that's already baked in, right? So when we bring it back again, what we're doing is we're creating a new harm, right? We're creating a new harm again and again. And this is actually one of the things, I was reading something recently, that there's, more and more questions about, like, talk therapy. Is it really helpful for people to talk through certain kinds of harmful experiences that happened to them in the past? Because what are you doing? You're bringing it back again and again, and you're creating that new painful feeling, a new painful feeling in the mind by dredging up that old thing, right? And I think it was that gentleman, I can't even pronounce his name, that scientist who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, right? Who talked a lot about this and said, right, sometimes we tell our patients of, horrible traumas, do not talk about it. Don't talk about it. Do other things. Meditate, try to feel your body in that spot, or learn how to do different ways of addressing it without this kind of bringing back the unpleasant, painful mind states. So I don't know
Yeah.
if that's helpful.
No, very much so. I mean, it reminds me of earlier years of practice and current. It doesn't, these things happen again in different versions of intensity.
Mhm.
And so, I used to think that once there's something that's experiencing this trauma, I would say, yes, more, more, more. Let me get it all out, kind of thing.
Um,
And so that, became an attachment to the trauma, right?
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
yeah.
So it's just kind of digging that groove even deeper, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes. And that's also, and I don't know if this was happening for you, but that's also one of the ways that people become identified also with their traumas, right? They become
Mm-hmm.
really, really, it becomes this thing that they're clinging to actually in some way,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know? And that's, it's not a criticism. It's just sad when that happens, you know, it's very, you
Hmm.
hope that people are able to find another way, you know,
Yeah. Hmm.
to,
Yeah.
to find
Yeah.
something, some
Yeah.
other more skillful identity that will help them, more less harmful identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's
Oh,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah. Thank you, Stig, for the question and the reflection. Okay, well, wait, do you mind, Patrick, if I give you the mic and you can, then people online can hear you too? Because
Is there a microphone on here?
there's this one that I have on, but this is,
Okay.
so the little round part is the actual mic
okay.
part of it.
Um, I I really enjoyed your talk, and there were sort of two parts to it. And the second part was about not being tied to our conceptualizations of our experience.
Mhm.
It's one way to put it.
Mhm.
And it sort of ties in with the first part of your talk in that our conceptualizations are part of the pile of perceptions, right? In the sense that when the Buddha said that there's these 5 piles of perception, he was in fact creating a category, creating a concept in which there are these 5 categories of experience.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's interesting and a little bit paradoxical to me that he would make a statement that maybe it's not paradoxical. Maybe what I want to do is turn this into a question is that he makes a statement that it's very important for awakening to, I think you said, understand the 5 aggregates,
Mm.
um, which if I take a very superficial interpretation of the word understanding, it would just be that there is this conceptual system with these 5 blobs.
Mm.
And, and if I understand this conceptual system, then I'm going to be awakened. But of course, that's completely contradictory to your second part, which
Right.
is, so what did he mean by understand?
Yes.
That's maybe my question.
Great. Good. Yeah. So this is critical right there. It's okay. You don't need to turn it off there, Patrick. So yes, the 5 aggregates are themselves a concept, right? As a framework, as a concept, and it's taking the body and 4 aspects of mind and sort of dividing them up in we could say a somewhat arbitrary way, right? It's a way that makes sense and that will help us to see. But I think, and it's very important that what we mean by understanding is an experiential understanding of them, right? And the way that one phrase that I like to bring forth oftentimes is when the Buddha speaks about the dawning of real awakening insight. He talks about it as kayena pusitva. That's Pali. It means having touched. It means literally having touched it with the body or by means of the body. So it means a sort of visceral experience of the khandhas or of knowing it in your bones kind of understanding. And I will also say that I gave it a little bit of short shrift there because he doesn't say just understand. He also says something else here. He says, and so now this is the same chapter, chapter 22, from number 24, where he says this. He says, without directly knowing and fully understanding the form, the feeling tones, the perceptions, the responses and reactions, and the consciousness, and becoming dispassionate toward it and abandoning it, one is incapable of destroying suffering. So he says both, right? He says you have to have this understanding, this embodied experience. You have to actually do that to the point where you are putting down the banner pole, right? You are letting go of your identification with that and all of your views about it. And then you are sort of seeing through it. You're letting each thing pass as it must, because it is a fleeting thing. So that's the abandoning of it. So, so he says that about each one of them. And then again, he says, the flip side. So he says, without all of those things, one is incapable of destroying suffering, and by directly knowing, fully understanding, becoming dispassionate toward it, and abandoning it, one is capable of destroying dukkha. So he is talking, right, about a kind of understanding that ultimately leads to this full relinquishment. Yeah. That's a great question. Otherwise, I would not have gone back to fill in all the gaps there. Yeah. All right, friends. I think that is going to be a wrap for tonight. I really appreciate your reflections and questions and your participation this evening. So I just want to dedicate the merits before we go, and also to say thank you to everyone who has supported the Vihara. We really, truly live by your support and are able to offer these programs by your support. So thank you for that. And please consider helping us out this season. But yes, dedicating the wonderful merits of our practice here this evening to the full awakening of all beings, known and unknown, seen and unseen, beings in all the realms. May we all be released from greed, hatred, and delusion. May we all discover the truths of our lives right here in these bodies and minds. May we all find absolute peace by the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts. May all beings be liberated. Okay, friends, take good care. Have a good evening. Thanks for coming out. See you soon. Bye-bye.